We welcome you. We're glad that you can be a part of this experience with us. We are into our Advent conspiracy. We are conspiring together to make sure that it's about Christ the King and not about consumerism. And we're looking at the second foundation to this conspiracy. The first one is worship fully. The second one is spend less. And when we say spend less, we've been focusing on spending less money on the superficial things about Christmas. We've been focusing on spending less time on those superficial things as well. And less energy last week. Last week we encouraged you not to burn the candle at both ends, which is something we tend to do, particularly at Advent season. Don't burn the Advent candle at both ends. We recognize that that first candle that we light in that 4-week celebration is the hope candle, the prophet's candle that was looking forward. And today we are asking you to consider spending less effort. And I want to ask this question: are you making life much harder for yourself than it needs to be? You know, Jesus said he would come and he would bring life in all of its fullness, and he does. But in truth, sometimes we make that fullness of life that we have harder than it needs to be by putting too much of ourselves into the mix and by neglecting to have more of him and less of us. There's an expression that we use. It's an old English expression. It's over-egging the pudding. You heard of that? No. We're not English. It's okay, because let me explain it. And I'd say don't over-egg the Christmas pudding, but it's really about Yorkshire pudding. Who's not heard of Yorkshire pudding? Just one person. Have you guys not eaten Yorkshire pudding? Oh my goodness. They don't know what they're missing. Why? We need to rectify that. Yorkshire pudding is delightful. It's food of God. It goes with Sunday roast, doesn't it, Susan? When was the last time you had Yorkshire pudding? About a month ago. I'm just realizing it's been longer than that since I've had it. It is beautiful. But this expression comes from many, many years ago, and it's about Yorkshire pudding. Because, you know, sometimes, or some people thought they could actually improve. You can't improve on perfection. But they thought they could. I just add a few more eggs into the mix. But apparently, this is what happens. You spoil it because it's rubbery if you put too many eggs in. So the expression, don't over-egg the pudding. Be careful that you don't overdo things. Putting in too much effort can make it more about you, and you could spoil it. Because we know this truth. Less is more. You've heard that? Less is more. More is less, oftentimes. The more there is of us, remember that time and effort and money, they're all ingredients of life. You've got to be careful that you don't overdo and overspend some of those things. You've got to be careful, particularly at Advent, that we remember who it's about. And it's not about us and all of our effort. It's about God. So less is actually more. And know this truth. We know this is true. A little effort can go an awful long way. Have you heard that? A little effort can go an awful long way. But it only goes a long way if you invest it in the right place. So we're asking you to spend less, but we're asking you to, rather than spend, that you invest. So when that time comes, you're not spent up, you've actually invested, and you're ready to celebrate Messiah's arrival. Let me give you a little example of less being more. Let me tell you a story on Christine. I've not told one for hours. Christine, as you know, many of you know, may not know online, but Christine is a dental nurse working for Queensland Health, oral health. Not oral health, oral health, spelled different. I'm not oral B, I'm oral B. It's different. And she works at the schools, so she works on the school vans. You've seen the vans, the dental vans outside? They help the students and families, not just through the school time, but through holiday time as well. And sometimes they move those vans from location to location, depending where they're fixed. And all of the clients, all of the patients are children, and usually with their parents, children. You've heard the expression, never work with children and animals. Well, Chris works with children. And sometimes it goes better than other times. And this one particular time, quite recently actually, she had a young boy in there, and he was not keen on getting in the chair or staying in the chair. In fact, he got himself out of that and wouldn't even get back in. Not only would he not get back in, he ran out of the surgery, the van, and he parked himself instead underneath it and refused to come out. Now, that's not a safe place under the van. It's not a safe place. And it's not good for kids to be under there. And they have other patients. They can't just say, oh, well, there's some kid under the van. We'll just wait till he comes out, and we'll just carry on as usual, because it's dangerous. So we've got to get him out. So the mother was doing all that she could and more to try and entice him to come out. She was giving more pleading, to do more pleading, as you do. Please, darling, please. Never heard my mother say this, but please, darling, come on out, please, please. There was lots of added pleads, come out. And on top of the pleads, which were being answered with, no, 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 then came the next one. This is the bribes, isn't it? The promises. Oh, if you come out, I promise you this, and I promise you, no, I promise you that, no. She was making all these pleads and promises, and he was not coming out. No way. So my wife, Christine, who's had a bit of an experience, had some experience with kids, went on the other side of the van and got down so she could make eye contact with him. He's under that space. She just did this, looked at him, and she said, don't make me come in there after you. Less is more. Usain Bolt has never moved as quickly as this little boy. Straight into the arms of his mother. Like a little koala with his mother, during a hurricane. He was clinging on for dear life. And no, she wasn't holding a syringe in her hand when she said that. It was behind her back. He couldn't even see that. No. Just joking. Queensland Health, just joking. Don't be so serious. Sometimes less is more. And more is actually less. Who's heard of the minimalists? Joshua Fields and Ryan Nicodemus. They call themselves the minimalists. They've been doing that for a while. They've been living that lifestyle of less is more. They've written a number of books. They've got at least one movie out. I think it's 2 on Netflix. And they do a podcast, a regular podcast. I think it's worth listening to just for the phrase at the end. I love the phrase. They use this every time. This is what they say. Remember to love people and to use things, because the opposite never works. And when you look at Christmas right now, how we've done it, you'd say, in the world, we love things. We've got materialistic. And we use people in order to get more things. And sometimes we're not even aware of it. So you have minimalism and you have materialism. We don't want to be on any of these extremes. One's like a philosophical way of life, which sounds better than materialism, but what we want is something better than that. Something that is a disciplined or discipled approach to life, approach to less being more, because it's focused on Jesus. And it's this, that we focus on what is essential, and we put our effort into that, rather than all these non-essential things which tend to take up all of our time, and we become busier and busier and busier and less effective and less productive. And that goes in the church as well. I have, just for the record, eliminated some years ago the word busy. I'm using it now, but I don't usually mention that. I just say, oh, that's the B word. I don't use the B word. Don't use it as an excuse, and I don't particularly like it. Here's what C.S. Lewis said. He said, busyness is not of the devil, it is the devil. If he can just get you busy on lots of non-essential things, putting in all your time and effort and your money into things that have no return whatsoever, his job is done. And by the way, he's doing a good job of that. So rather than being busy, we're being focused on the vital few things rather than the urgent many that we're told in life. So what are the vital few? Well, here's some things to keep in mind as we do that. From Jesus, 4 things. His love is more than enough. His grace is more than sufficient. Remember what he said to Paul. When Paul had what he called a thorn in the flesh that was such a bother to him, he asked 3 times that the Lord would heal him. And God said, my grace is sufficient for you. His mercy is more than we deserve. We like to think about justice. If we got what was our just deserts, you wouldn't like it. It would be separated from God forever. Jesus got your just deserts. His mercy is more than we deserve, and his power is more than what we can imagine. We come down to this fundamental truth. It's about relational capital. We've been looking at 5 capitals as God values them. Next week, our last one in Spend Less is spiritual capital, which is spiritual equity. It's wisdom and authority and power that comes from God. The second one before that, the second important one, is relational capital. That is, how much relational equity do we have to invest? The currency is God himself, relationship with him. It's family, it's friends, it's relational. And we know that Jesus put his physical capital into the disciples so that they could have this wonderful relational capital to spend with him. Jesus was not a minimalist. He is creator of the world. He's king of all things. But he's also one, if you could say, he's an essentialist and only focused on the essential things in life, mostly entirely doing what his Father had showed him and called him to do. There's a wonderful passage, it's in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 22, reading from verse 34, where the Pharisees tried to trick Jesus. Let me read these words for you. We know it as the Great Commandment. Verse 34, Matthew's Gospel, chapter 22. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. And one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest of the commandments. It's from Deuteronomy chapter 6 that he's quoted. And verse 39, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Notice you've got to love your neighbor as yourself. You've got to respect and know yourself and love God's creation of you. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Notice how he takes the first 5 books of the law of the Bible that the Pharisees like to major on and actually add to lots of other things. And the major prophets and the minor prophets, and Jesus brings them all down into these simple, vital few. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. It was said that the best rabbis could recite the most important fundamentals while still standing on one leg. I've tried that.